The radio crackles. 22 German fighters circle above. 1 Spitfire below. No backup, no escape. The pilot banks hard, fuel gauge dropping, ammunition nearly spent. They told him this aircraft was obsolete, that newer models had replaced it, that he should have stayed grounded. But logic doesn't care what the manual says, and neither does survival. Spring 1943. The Mediterranean theater burns under relentless sun. Malta, that tiny island fortress south of Sicily, has endured more than 2 years of siege. The Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica have dropped more bombs per square mile here than on London. The harbors are graveyards of twisted steel. The airfields are cratered moonscapes patched with coral dust and crushed stone. Spitfires defend Malta, but not the famous ones, not the sleek Mark 9s with their Merlin 61 engines and 2-stage superchargers, not the interceptors climbing to 35,000 feet to meet the high-altitude bombers. Those went to England, to North Africa, to the fronts that matter on the maps in Whitehall. Malta gets the cast-offs. The Mark vs. aircraft, designed in 1940, rushed into production in 1941, now considered obsolete by 1943. Single-stage superchargers, lower operational ceiling, less speed at altitude. The Air Ministry calls them interim fighters, stopgaps, placeholders until the real reinforcements arrive. The pilots call them what they have, nothing more, nothing less. The heat here is constant. It bakes the metal of the fuselage until you can't touch it without gloves. It shimmers off the limestone runways in waves that blur the horizon. Inside the cockpit, temperatures reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Pilots strip down to shorts and undershirts, but the sweat still soaks through. The parachute harness chafes. The oxygen mask leaves red grooves across the face. Ground crews work through the night. They patch bullet holes with fabric and dope. They scavenge parts from wrecks. They stretch fuel and ammunition because convoys rarely make it through. Every sortie is calculated against what remains. Every repair is a negotiation with scarcity. The enemy knows Malta's importance. It sits astride the supply routes to Rommel's Africa Corps. Convoys from Italy must pass within sight of its cliffs. So the Axis pounds the island daily, testing the defenses, grinding down the resistance. The strategy is simple. Make Malta untenable. Starve it, break it, remove it from the equation. By spring 1943, the worst of the siege has lifted. Allied victories in North Africa have shifted the momentum, but the air battles continue. German and Italian fighters still prowl the skies, still hunt for targets, still seek to dominate the airspace, and the Spitfire Mk Vs still scramble to meet them, outdated or not. No one expects miracles from these aircraft anymore. They expect attrition, survival measured in sorties, small victories that add up over weeks. The doctrine is conservative. Preserve the fighter force, avoid unnecessary risk, wait for the reinforcements that will change the game. But doctrine assumes logic, and war has a way of ignoring assumptions. If you want more such stories, like and subscribe so these lives aren't forgotten. Flight Lieutenant James MacLachlan learned to fly before he learned to doubt himself. Born in 1919 in India, raised between continents, he joined the Royal Air Force in 1938 because flying made sense to him. The mechanics of lift and drag, the mathematics of energy and altitude, the pure physics of staying alive at 300 miles per hour. He was not a boisterous pilot, not the type who filled the mess hall with stories or swagger. He was precise, methodical, the kind of pilot who double-checked his harness and counted his ammunition before every flight, who memorized the quirks of each aircraft he flew, who treated the Spitfire not as a weapon, but as a system requiring constant calibration. In 1941, MacLachlan lost his left arm. A combat mission over France. A cannon shell tore through the cockpit and shattered bone. He kept the aircraft steady, crossed the channel, landed with one hand on the stick. The surgeons amputated below the elbow. The Air Ministry grounded him. Standard procedure. Fighter pilots need 2 hands for the throttle and stick. for the gun button and trim wheel. MacLachlan refused to accept it. He taught himself to fly again. He designed a custom harness that let him operate the throttle with his residual limb. He practiced until the movements became automatic, until he could dogfight, land, and recover without thinking about the missing hand, until the artificial limb became an extension of his intent. The Air Ministry remained skeptical. They allowed him to return to flying, but not to frontline squadrons, not to the critical theaters. He was assigned to Malta in early 1943 to the Mark versus everyone else had outgrown, a disabled pilot flying obsolete aircraft on an island whose strategic importance was fading. MacLachlan didn't complain. He studied the aircraft. He learned its limitations not as weaknesses but as parameters. The Mark V couldn't climb as fast as the newer models, so he adjusted his tactics to favor speed over altitude. It couldn't turn as tightly at high speed, so he used gravity and dive angles to compensate. He flew the aircraft as it was, not as he wished it to be. His ground crew noticed the way he tested the control surfaces before every flight, the way he checked the gun harmonization himself, the way he calculated fuel loads to the gallon, balancing range against weight. He treated the Mark V like a tool that demanded respect, not affection. Other pilots saw the Mark V as a burden. MacLachlan saw it as a problem with solutions, and problems, he believed, could be solved if you paid attention. April 6, 1943. The reconnaissance reports arrive at dawn. German fighters staging over Sicily. A large formation, composition unclear. Likely a sweep intended to provoke the Malta defenses to test response times, to gather intelligence on Allied air strength. The standing orders are clear: avoid engagement unless necessary. The Mark Vs are outnumbered, outperformed, and too valuable to risk in unnecessary combat. The new Spitfire 9s are due within weeks. Until then, the strategy is conservation. Let the enemy probe. Let them wonder. Don't give them targets. MacLachlan is assigned a routine patrol, standard circuit around the island, eyes on the radar pickets and shipping lanes. Return before fuel drops below reserve. No heroics. He takes off at 800 hours. The Spitfire climbs slowly in the dense morning air. The engine hums, steady and familiar. The altimeter winds upward. 5,000 feet, 10,000, 15. He levels off at 18,000 feet, where the Mark V breathes easiest. The sky is empty, cloudless. The Mediterranean stretches in every direction, a blue sheet wrinkled by wind. Below, Malta's limestone cliffs glow white in the sun. The radio hums with static. No chatter, no warnings, just the sound of his own breathing in the oxygen mask. Then the radar station breaks silence. Multiple contacts, high altitude, bearing north-northwest, distance closing. MacLachlan checks his fuel. Enough for 30 more minutes of patrol. He scans the sky. Nothing yet. The sun is behind him, the horizon sharp and clear. He waits. The contacts resolve. First as dark specks against the blue, then as distinct shapes. Messerschmitt Bf 109s. The newer G model with the bulged cowling and the heavy cannons. Fast, aggressive, built to kill bombers and outclimb interceptors. He counts them. 10, 15, 20. More appear, stacked in loose formations weaving across the sky. 22 enemy fighters. No bombers, no ground targets. A pure fighter sweep, hunting for opposition. The logical response is to disengage, report the contact, let them pass, preserve the aircraft. Standard doctrine for a single Mark V against overwhelming odds. MacLachlan does not disengage. He banks toward the formation. The decision is not bravado, it is calculation. The German formation is heading toward Malta. If they reach the island unopposed, they will strafe the airfields, the parked aircraft, the supply dumps, the radar stations. A single strafing run could destroy more fighters than a week of combat. MacLachlan's mission is not to win. It is to disrupt, to make the enemy react. to turn their offensive sweep into a defensive scramble, to buy time for the ground defenses to prepare. He angles the Spitfire into the sun, gaining every advantage the Mark V can offer. Speed, position, the element of shock. He closes the distance, throttle wide open, the engine roaring at maximum continuous power. The German pilots see him. One Spitfire, alone. They break formation, turning to meet the threat. Standard response. Swarm the lone attacker, overwhelm him with numbers, eliminate the nuisance. MacLachlan opens fire at 400 yards. A long burst. The tracers arc through the air. The lead Messerschmitt breaks hard left. The formation scatters. Instinct takes over. The hunters become cautious. They don't know if he's the vanguard of a larger force. He climbs. The Mark V strains against gravity, the supercharger whining. The Messerschmitts climb faster, but MacLachlan isn't trying to outclimb them. He's trying to keep them climbing. Burning fuel. Burning time. One Bf 109 dives on him from above. MacLachlan rolls inverted and pulls through, the G-forces crushing him into the seat. The Messerschmitt overshoots. He reverses, lines up, fires again. A brief burst. The enemy fighter breaks away, trailing smoke or vapor, impossible to tell. Another attack from the left. MacLachlan turns into it, tightening the circle, forcing the German pilot to choose between collision and breaking off. The pilot brakes. MacLachlan fires into the turn. Hits or misses, he doesn't know. There's no time to confirm. The radio erupts. The radar station. The airfield. They're demanding his status, asking if he needs support, telling him to disengage. He ignores the radio. His focus is absolute. Fuel gauge dropping. Ammunition counter winding down. 22 fighters circling, coordinating, adjusting their tactics. He dives. The Mark V accelerates, the airspeed indicator climbing past 300 knots. 350. 400. The controls stiffen, the wings shudder. He levels out low, skimming the wavetops, forcing the enemy to follow him down. At low altitude, the Bf 109's advantage disappears. The playing field flattens. MacLachlan turns hard, the wingtip nearly kissing the water. The Messerschmitts follow, but cautiously. At this altitude, one mistake is fatal. He leads them in a wide arc, away from Malta, away from the airfields. Every minute they chase him is a minute they're not bombing the island. The engagement stretches past 10 minutes, then 15. The fuel gauge needle drops toward the red. MacLachlan calculates the distance back to Malta, the reserve required. The margin of error. He has perhaps 5 minutes of combat fuel remaining. The Messerschmitts are adapting. They're no longer chasing in a pack. They're setting up coordinated attacks, high and low, slashing passes, trying to box him in, to force a mistake. MacLachlan uses the sun. He climbs back into it, throttles screaming, the engine temperature gauge edging toward the yellow. The Bf 109s follow, but the glare blinds them for critical seconds. He turns inside their attacks, forcing them to overshoot, breaking their coordination. His ammunition is nearly gone, short bursts now, 1 second, 2, just enough to make them react, to keep them defensive, to prevent them from ignoring him and pressing toward Malta. One Messerschmitt closes from behind. MacLachlan sees the muzzle flashes, hears the thud of impacts. Cannon shells punch through the Spitfire's tail section. The aircraft shudders. The rudder responds sluggishly. He kicks the pedals, compensating with aileron, keeping the nose steady. He reverses hard, pulling the Spitfire through a vertical climb and roll that bleeds speed but changes his angle. The Messerschmitt can't follow the maneuver at this airspeed. It stalls, flips into a spin. MacLachlan doesn't wait to see the recovery. He dives again, heading east, toward home. The Bf 109s pursue, but their fuel is also low. They've been burning maximum power for 20 minutes. Their endurance is limited. One by one they peel off, heading back to Sicily. The attack is over. MacLachlan levels off at 3,000 feet. The engine coughs once, twice. The fuel gauge reads empty. He switches to the reserve tank. The engine catches, smooths out. 5 minutes of fuel, maybe less. The limestone cliffs of Malta appear ahead. The airfield, the runway. He lowers the landing gear. The hydraulics groan. One wheel locks, the other doesn't. He cycles the system. Both wheels lock. The flaps extend. He lines up on the runway, nose high, compensating for the damaged rudder. The approach is ragged, the Spitfire yawing left and right. He touches down hard, the tires screeching, the tail wheel bouncing. The aircraft slews, but holds the center line. He brakes. The engine coughs and dies as he rolls to a stop. Ground crew sprint toward the Spitfire. They count the damage: 17 cannon shell impacts, torn fabric, punctured fuel tanks, bent control surfaces. The aircraft is barely airworthy. MacLachlan climbs out. His flight suit is soaked with sweat. His left arm aches where the harness rubbed against the prosthetic. He says nothing, just walks toward the debriefing hut, his logbook tucked under his right arm. The intelligence officer asks how many he shot down. MacLachlan shrugs. 1 confirmed, maybe 2. He doesn't know. That wasn't the mission. The officer asks why he engaged. MacLachlan's answer is simple. They were heading for the airfield. Someone had to turn them around. The combat report circulates through RAF command. 1 Spitfire Mk V, engaging 22 enemy fighters for 17 minutes. No losses on the British side. The German sweep aborted. The airfield untouched. Analysts study the report. They note the tactics, the use of altitude and sun position, the refusal to fight the enemy's fight, the focus on disruption rather than destruction. It contradicts the prevailing doctrine, which emphasizes avoiding unfavorable engagements, but the results are undeniable. MacLachlan didn't win by defeating 22 fighters. He won by preventing them from completing their mission. The objective wasn't aerial victory, it was strategic denial. Other pilots begin to reconsider the Mk V, not as an obsolete aircraft, but as a different kind of weapon. It can't dominate at high altitude. It can't outrun the latest German fighters in level flight. But in the hands of a pilot who understands its strengths, it can still change outcomes. The ground crews repair MacLachlan's Spitfire. It takes 2 days. They patch the holes, replace the damaged control surfaces, test the engine. The aircraft returns to service. So does MacLachlan. He flies 36 more combat missions over the next 3 months. Not all are as dramatic. Most are routine patrols, convoy escorts, reconnaissance, the unglamorous work of maintaining air superiority. But his example spreads. Pilots stop seeing the Mk V as a limitation. They start seeing it as a tool that requires different thinking. Tactics evolve, formations adapt. The obsolete fighter becomes a flexible platform, effective not because it matches the enemy's performance, but because it's flown by people who refuse to be limited by specifications. Malta's air defenses hold. The island never falls. The convoys resume. The supply lines stabilize. The Axis forces in North Africa, denied resupply, collapsed by May 1943. The Mediterranean opens. The path to Italy clears. MacLachlan's single engagement on April 6th is not the reason for this success, but it is a thread in the fabric. 1 decision, 1 pilot, 1 obsolete aircraft, proving that numbers on a data sheet don't determine outcomes, people do. James MacLachlan survives the war in the air, but dies before it ends. July 1943. A routine ferry flight. Engine failure over the Irish Sea. He attempts a forced landing. The aircraft crashes. He is 24 years old. The official records list him as a casualty of mechanical failure. The obituaries note his bravery, his determination to continue flying despite his injury. But they miss the deeper lesson. MacLachlan didn't succeed because he was fearless. He succeeded because he was logical. He saw the Spitfire Mk V not as a symbol or a disappointment, but as a machine with measurable capabilities. He saw the enemy formation not as an overwhelming threat, but as a problem with variables: speed, altitude, time, fuel, psychology. He understood that victory isn't always about superiority. Sometimes it's about asymmetry, about using what you have in ways the enemy doesn't expect, about turning limitations into tactics. The Mark V continued to serve throughout the war, in theaters where high-altitude performance mattered less, in ground attack roles, in training units that taught new pilots the fundamentals. The aircraft retired quietly, without fanfare, its contributions measured not in headlines, but in missions flown, pilots trained, and enemies deterred. Decades later, aviation historians revisit MacLachlan's combat reports. They analyze the engagement through modern lenses: game theory, decision science. They conclude that his tactics were optimal given the constraints, that his choice to engage was rational, that his survival was not luck but skill. But the numbers miss the human element. The moment when a pilot with one arm and an outdated aircraft decided that the mission mattered more than the odds. The moment when logic and courage converged. The moment when the possible expanded because someone refused to accept the limits others had drawn. War is often remembered through its technologies, the aircraft that dominated the skies, the innovations that shifted the balance. But technology is inert. It requires human judgment to become effective, human courage to become decisive, human ingenuity to transcend its specifications. MacLachlan's legacy isn't the Spitfire Mk V. It's the reminder that obsolescence is a judgment, not a fact. That the best weapon is the one you understand completely. That heroism isn't about invincibility. It's about knowing what must be done and doing it anyway. The sky over Malta is quiet now. The cliffs still glow white in the Mediterranean sun. The airfields are museums. The Spitfires rest in hangars preserved behind glass. But the lesson endures, not in metal or mechanics, but in the simple truth that one person paying attention can hold the line, can change the outcome, can prove that logic, courage, and an obsolete fighter are enough when they have to be.